The rescue. The desert moon was a wasteland of heat and silence, broken only by the hiss of wind dragging long scars across the sand. Captain Elias Ward staggered forward, his body aching from the crash. His dropship lay in ruins behind him, smoke curling into the pale sky like a beacon for every hostile patrol in orbit. He should have been dead with the rest of his squad. But stubbornness, the curse and blessing of humanity, kept his boots moving. The war with the Seralyth Empire had already cost Earth too much. They were faster, stronger, and commanded fleets that dwarfed anything humanity could build. But Elias knew their weakness: arrogance. The Seralyth always underestimated the resilience of humans. It was why he was alive, trudging across this forsaken rock instead of rotting in a shallow grave. His scanner blinked faintly, picking up energy readings ahead. Hope rose. Maybe a hidden supply cache. Maybe a relay station he could use to send for extraction. He pushed forward until the sand dipped into a narrow ravine. And there, half buried in stone, he found it. A fortified compound, small but humming with alien machinery. Through his binoculars, Elias studied the guards. Seralyth soldiers, towering, armored, carrying weapons that would tear through his last rifle in seconds. But something about the facility felt different. It wasn't a supply base. It was a prison. Crouching low, Elias crept closer until he had a clear view through a grated viewport. The sight stopped his breath. Inside, chained to a grav-restraint field, was a figure unlike any he'd seen. She was Seralyth. Yes, her skin patterned with luminous markings that pulsed faintly like stars under her flesh. Her regal posture, even in captivity, radiated authority. Her eyes, brilliant silver pools, stared at nothing, dulled by exhaustion. She was no soldier. She was something more. Recognition struck. Elias had seen her face on 1,000 tactical briefings. Seralyth, the Seralyth queen. His heart hammered. This wasn't possible. The humans believed she ruled from her throne world light years away. Yet here she was, shackled in the dirt, guarded by her own kind. For long minutes, he wrestled with the weight of the choice. Logic screamed at him to walk away. She was the enemy monarch. If he freed her, humanity, he might call him a traitor. But as he watched her struggle for breath under the crushing field, his chest tightened. She wasn't a conqueror here. She was a prisoner, abandoned by those who should have defended her. And Elias had never been good at walking away. Night fell quickly on the desert moon. In the dark, he crept to the compound, setting makeshift explosives from the wreckage of his dropship. When the charges blew, chaos rippled through the base. Guards rushed to contain the flames while Elias slipped inside, rifle steady in his hands. He found her cell, the grav restraints glowing faintly. Her eyes lifted, widening as they landed on him. Surprise flickered, then suspicion. A human. Her voice was hoarse, but carried the weight of command. Come to gloat at my disgrace. Not exactly, Elias muttered, kneeling by the control panel. The alien script made no sense, but instinct and trial carried him through. Sparks jumped, the restraints flickered, and the field collapsed with a sharp hiss. Seralyth slumped forward, catching herself with trembling arms. For the first time, Elias saw fear in her expression. Not of him, but of what she represented in this state. Vulnerability. Why? She demanded. You gain nothing from this. Elias met her eyes. Because no one deserves to be left like this. Not even you. For a moment, she only stared, her pride warring with confusion. Then the shouts of approaching guards cut through the silence. Elias hauled her up, slinging her arm over his shoulder despite her protests. Together they staggered through the burning halls, evading patrols with every ounce of human cunning. He used shadows, diversions, and sheer recklessness, dragging her through gaps in their defenses they would never have expected a lone human to exploit. They burst into the night, flames painting the desert sky behind them. A stolen skimmer waited, one he'd rigged during the chaos. Elias shoved Seralyth inside and slammed the accelerator. Blue light flared as they shot across the sands, enemy fire streaking past them. Only when the compound was a dwindling glow did Seralyth finally speak again. Her voice was quieter, uncertain. You risked your life for me. For your enemy. Elias kept his eyes on the horizon. You're not my enemy right now. You're someone who needed saving. That's enough. She studied him in silence, as if trying to unravel the impossible puzzle of humanity. Then, slowly, she leaned back against the seat, exhaustion overtaking her. The desert stretched on endlessly before them. Behind lay a burning prison and enemies in pursuit. But for the first time in her life, the queen of the Seralyth Empire had been saved, not by her generals, not by her armies, but by the hands of a lone human soldier who refused to abandon her. And Elias Ward knew that nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. Flight through the stars. The skimmer cut across the desert night like a streak of blue fire, its stolen engines whining under the strain. Elias kept one hand steady on the controls and the other pressed to the side of his ribs where shrapnel had cut deep during the raid. Pain clawed at him with every breath, but he didn't dare slow down. Behind them, in the dark horizon, pinpricks of light marked the pursuit. The Seralyth did not forgive traitors. And what he had just done, freeing their queen from captivity, was treason in their eyes of the highest order. Seralyth sat beside him, silent but watchful. Though weakened, her posture was still regal, her silver eyes reflecting the streaks of starlight above. Elias couldn't help but notice that even in exhaustion she radiated authority, a presence far greater than the ruined desert could contain. "You are injured," she said at last, her tone more observation than concern. "I've been worse," Elias muttered, keeping his eyes on the controls. "You are reckless," she pressed. "No human could hope to outrun a Seralyth patrol." "Then it's good you've got me, not just any human," he shot back, lips twisting in the hint of a grin. "I'm stubborn enough to make it work." Her eyes narrowed, as though weighing whether to be insulted or intrigued. For the queen of a species that prided itself on superiority, Elias's casual defiance was alien in itself. Hours later, they reached the jagged rim of a canyon, where Elias abandoned the skimmer for a buried hangar he'd scouted weeks earlier. Hidden inside was a half-derelict transport vessel left behind during an earlier campaign. He had no guarantee it would even fly, but it was better than waiting for their hunters to descend. The ship groaned as its engines sputtered awake, coughing fire before steadying into a low roar. Elias slumped into the pilot's chair, his hands moving with ease over controls he'd taught himself to repair. Seralyth stood behind him, her gaze scanning the flickering panels with cool precision. "You know nothing of our star charts," she said. "How do you intend to escape this system without guidance?" Elias smirked. "Same way I've survived every suicide mission they've thrown me into, trial and error." The queen's lips curved just slightly at the edges. Amusement? Impossible. Yet there it was. When the transport broke through the thin atmosphere, Elias felt the familiar drop in his stomach as the void swallowed them. Stars spread across the viewport, endless and bright. Behind, small glimmers of enemy craft surged from the moon's orbit, their blue thrusters blazing like angry fireflies. "Hold on," Elias muttered. He yanked the ship into a sharp dive toward the shadow of a nearby asteroid belt. The vessel rattled violently as they plunged through tumbling rocks, but Elias's hands were steady. He wove between colossal stones, using debris as cover while the pursuing ships struggled to match his erratic path. One collided headlong with a drifting boulder, the explosion painting fire across the dark. Seralyth gripped the rail behind him, eyes wide as the human darted through death with terrifying precision. "You are insane," she breathed. "Not insane," Elias replied through clenched teeth. "Just human." By the time they emerged from the belt, only silence followed. The pursuers had broken off, unwilling to risk more ships in the chaos. Elias leaned back, exhaling a ragged laugh. He was alive, and for now, so was she. In the quiet that followed, Seralyth moved to the co-pilot's seat. For the first time, she studied him not as an enemy soldier, but as something else entirely. His uniform was torn, his face lined with exhaustion, yet his eyes burned with an unyielding light she had never seen among her own kind. "Why did they betray you?" Elias asked finally. Her gaze flickered away. "Because I sought peace," she admitted. "For decades my generals urged conquest. They saw humanity as prey to be dominated. I saw potential. Perhaps arrogance blinded me, but I believed war could end. That was weakness to them. They seized my throne, and with it, my empire." Elias was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "If peace is weakness, I'd rather be weak. Humanity survived worse odds than this. We're still here." His words unsettled her more than any weapon could. The Seralyth had always ruled through fear and power. Yet this soldier carried no throne, no army, only conviction. And somehow, impossibly, it was enough. Days passed in uneasy companionship as they limped through uncharted space. Elias repaired systems with scavenged parts, teaching Seralyth how to hold tools and patch wires. She learned quickly, her elegance now tempered with practicality. In return, she revealed fragments of Seralyth culture, their star songs, their honor codes, their secret names whispered only among family. One night, as they drifted among the silent glow of a nebula, Seralyth asked softly, "Do you not fear me? I am the sovereign of your enemy. My people have slaughtered yours." Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't fear you," he said. "I pity you, because for all your power, you've been surrounded by liars and traitors. And because you've never had anyone who would fight for you, not because they had to, but because they chose to." The words struck her deeper than any blade. In that moment, she realized she was beginning to see him not as a rescuer, not as a human, but as something more dangerous, someone who could change her. The transport drifted onward, hunted still, but inside its metal shell, the first fragile threads of trust, and something more, had begun to form. The Queen's Awakening. The frontier world had no name on any star map, only a scattering of coordinates buried in Elias's memory from a half-forgotten mission. It was green and wild, its surface unscarred by industry or war. Towering forests stretched to the horizon, broken by silver rivers and jagged mountains. For Elias, it was the first sign of peace he'd seen in months. For Seralyth, it was alien beauty, a world unconquered and unclaimed. They landed in a valley where the canopy parted just enough to conceal the transport ship. The engines sputtered and died, leaving only the chorus of strange birds and the rustle of unseen creatures. Elias descended the ramp with a rifle in hand, scanning the tree-line. Seralyth followed more slowly, her posture cautious, as though the ground itself were foreign. "Stay close," Elias warned. "Planets like this don't care who you are. The wildlife will kill a queen as quickly as a soldier." Her silver eyes narrowed. "You presume much, human. I'm not so fragile." He only smirked. "We'll see." The days that followed became a strange rhythm of survival. Elias hunted with traps and crude spears when his ammunition began to dwindle. He showed her how to filter water with sand and cloth, how to read the patterns of wind through the leaves to predict storms. At first, Seralyth resisted, her pride bristling at being taught like a child. But necessity eroded arrogance, and soon she watched, listened, and, begrudgingly, learned. One evening, Elias returned from the forest carrying a small kill slung over his shoulder. Seralyth was waiting by the fire pit they had built together, her luminous markings glowing faintly in the twilight. She tilted her head as he set the catch down. "You find joy in this," she said. He arched a brow. "Joy? In the hunt, in the fire, in surviving where others would falter. Your people thrive on hardship. I see it now. You are hunters, not prey." There was no mockery in her tone, only quiet realization. Elias met her gaze and saw, for the first time, admiration instead of suspicion. The bond between them grew in the small moments. They shared meals by the fire, their shadows cast long against the trees. She told him of her childhood beneath the crystalline towers of Seralyth, of tutors who demanded perfection and generals who whispered war into her ear. He, in turn, spoke of Earth, oceans that stretched beyond sight, storms that could topple cities, and the stubborn spirit of a species that refused to bow. Sometimes she laughed at his stories, a sound so unexpected from the queen that Elias found himself smiling long after it faded. Other times, she listened with an intensity that unsettled him, as if he were rewriting truths she had carried all her life. But the galaxy had not forgotten them. On the sixth night, the sky above the valley burned with streaks of light. Seralyth dropships, hunting still. Their haven had been discovered. Elias woke to the scream of engines overhead and the crack of plasma fire tearing through the tree-line. He shoved Seralyth to cover, his rifle already in hand. The forest erupted in chaos, trees splintering, earth exploding. "Stay down," he barked, returning fire with sharp, measured bursts. His shots struck true, dropping the first wave of scouts before they breached the clearing. But there were too many. Seralyth rose beside him, no longer the fragile captive he had freed, but a queen in truth. She shouted commands in her native tongue, and though no soldiers remained to hear them, her voice carried the weight of a leader unbroken. Together they fought, his aim and ferocity matched with her strategic mind, directing their defense like a conductor commanding battle symphony. Still, the tide pressed closer. Plasma seared past, grazing Elias's side. He fell hard, pain lancing through his ribs. The rifle slipped from his hand. Seralyth dropped to her knees beside him, her silver eyes wide with something he had never seen in them before. Fear, not for herself, but for him. "Elias," she cried, her voice trembling. "Do not leave me now." With a grimace, he forced himself upright, dragging the rifle back to his shoulder. "Not planning to," he muttered, his voice ragged. With his last strength, he fired into the fuel cell of a dropship as it landed. The explosion lit the valley in fire, scattering the remaining soldiers into retreat. The battlefield fell silent except for the crackle of flames. Elias collapsed against the roots of a fallen tree, breath shallow, blood soaking through his uniform. Seralyth cradled him, her glowing markings bright against the dark. "You should have left me," he whispered. Her grip tightened. "Never. You're mine now, Elias Ward, by my vow and by my heart." She spoke the words in her own tongue, an oath no Seralyth queen had ever uttered outside her bloodline. And though Elias did not understand the language, he understood her eyes, her touch, and the tremor in her voice. For the first time since her throne was stolen, Seralyth did not feel abandoned. For the first time since the war began, Elias did not feel alone. The fire of battle still smoldered around them, but between queen and soldier, something far stronger had been forged. Love across empires. The valley still smoldered with the wreckage of the battle. Smoke curled above blackened trees, and the air reeked of scorched metal. Elias leaned against the transport's bulkhead, bandages tight around his ribs. He had survived, but only barely. Seralyth had not left his side, her luminous markings flickering like stars as she worked tirelessly to keep him alive. When the last of his strength returned, Elias pushed himself to his feet. "We can't stay," he said, his voice rough but steady. "They'll send more. We need to move now." Seralyth nodded, her face set with resolve. "Then we do not run blindly. We strike toward neutral space. If I can broadcast proof of my captivity, the general's lies will unravel. Humanity will see me not as an enemy, but as a betrayed sovereign seeking peace." Elias raised a brow. "And you think they'll listen?" She held his gaze, her voice quiet but firm. "If they will not listen to a queen, perhaps they will listen to the human who saved her." It was a dangerous gamble, but there was no other path. Together, they repaired the transport with what little they had, patching holes and coaxing life back into failing engines. Every moment was a risk. The hunters could return at any time, but every moment also bound them closer. When the ship finally roared to life, they launched into the void once more, leaving the burning forest behind. The journey was perilous. Patrols hounded them across sectors, forcing Elias into reckless maneuvers through collapsing asteroid fields and plasma storms. Seralyth guided him with her knowledge of hidden routes, her once imperial authority reduced now to whispered suggestions that Elias somehow turned into victories. In those desperate hours, their walls crumbled. Between battles and long stretches of silence, they confessed truths neither had dared before. "I was raised to see your kind as lesser," Seralyth admitted one night, her voice trembling as if ashamed. "But you fight with a fire my people have forgotten. You risked everything, not for power, not for gain, but for me." "Why?" Elias stared at the stars ahead, his jaw tight. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being my enemy. And I'd rather die beside you than live in a galaxy that tears us apart." The words hung in the quiet, heavier than any vow. Seralyth reached for his hand, her fingers cool and strange against his skin, yet achingly right. "You are a fool," she whispered, but her eyes shone with something softer, deeper. "And my heart is yours." Their final trial came at the edge of a crimson nebula. As they prepared to transmit her message to both human and loyalist Seralyth channels, an enemy fleet emerged, flagships led by the very generals who had betrayed her. "Into the line," Elias muttered, hands flying over the controls. "Then let us end it on our terms," Seralyth said, rising to her full height. The queen within her was no longer caged or broken. She was alive, and she would be heard. The battle erupted like thunder. Elias threw the transport through impossible maneuvers, weaving between warships that dwarfed them. Plasma fires seared past, rattling the hull. Seralyth stood at the comm station, her voice echoing across every frequency. "I am Seralyth, true sovereign of the Seralyth Empire. I live. I was betrayed by those who lusted for endless war. They stole my throne, and they would see the galaxy burn to hide their treachery. But know this, I was saved not by my armies, not by fear, but by a human. And it is with him I now stand." Her words rippled through space like a shockwave. Loyalist vessels broke formation, hesitating. Human ships, once prepared to fire on them both, now held position, listening. The generals screamed denials, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Elias seized the moment. Spotting a weakness in the enemy flagship shields, he drove their transport in close, launching the last of their stolen charges. The explosion tore through the cruiser, the shock wave scattering the fleet. Silence followed. The battle was not won, not yet, but it had changed. The galaxy had heard her voice and seen a human and a queen stand as one. Hours later, in the quiet aftermath, the two of them stood in the transport's viewport, watching the stars drift. Seralyth reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "You gave me back more than my freedom," she said softly. "You gave me a reason to hope again, a reason to live." Elias squeezed her hand gently. "You gave me the same. Guess that makes us even." She turned, her silver eyes shimmering. "No," Elias warned. "We are not even, for I have fallen in love with you. And no throne, no empire, no war will ever change that." Elias's breath caught, but he saw no lie in her gaze. Only truth, raw and undeniable. He leaned closer, their foreheads touching, the vast galaxy forgotten for a moment. Together, they faced a future uncertain and perilous. But whatever storms awaited, they would weather them not as enemies, not as soldier and queen, but as two souls bound across the stars. And in that fragile union, a new chapter for both their worlds had begun.